I'm happy to introduce Becca Flis. She's a cast metal sculptor who is intrigued by the environmental foundry. The environmental foundry and ancient processes. Some of you may have seen her demonstration yesterday, so this is her talk backing the demonstration. She also has an interest in ancient Greek clay molding. So she has worked under Coral Lambert at Albert to run the cast iron workshop at the most recent International Sculpture Conference in Miami, Florida. Her work has been in the student juried exhibition at the National Conference of Contemporary Cast Iron Art at Sloss Furnaces in Birmingham, and also at the State University of New York Student Art Exhibition in Albany, New York. One of her pieces, Palm, is currently on loan to Alfred University, and she currently lives and works in South Glens Falls, New York. Becca?
I'm Becca. I just graduated from Alfred University, and I'm going to be giving a talk about dung molding. So I originally, I guess I should go. Sorry for the cutoff, by the way. The formatting is a little weird, so just bear with me. It's like cut off. I'll try to talk about it. So I originally got into this process because I'm like super allergic to all of the modern processes, like any sort of resin that's like oil based. I like break out in hives every time I use it. And so when I found out that Coral Lambert was teaching an environmental foundry class, like I was very interested in that because it only uses natural materials and I could touch them without breaking out or having like allergic reactions. I have like super sensitive skin, I guess. And so I was very interested in these sort of natural elements, especially because a lot of my work deals with the tactile nature of the material. So we did a process in that class that was an ancient African, based off an ancient African method of dung mold making. And in ancient Africa, these types of dung and clay molds were used to cast bronze. But I've been using them to cast iron as well as bronze. The four main ingredients of this kind process are dung, fire clay, grog, which is crushed fire clay, and water. So I have pictures of them up there. So I'm just gonna take you through like the process of making one of these molds. So you start off with a wax pattern, and it's very similar to ceramic shell, but with less beading and venting because of the dung. When it burns out of the mold, it leaves these porous air pockets, and so it's a lot easier for the gas to escape the mold. So you don't have to like extensively vent things like you do with ceramic shell, because ceramic shell is very dense material and doesn't allow for a lot of air escapage. So you start off with a wax pattern, and this is a project that I did in Coral Lambert's environmental foundry class. So I made these sort of like wax impressions of my hand as little like offerings. So that's what the cupped shape is. So this is the wax that I had. The next step is to coat it with mold wash, which is a mixture of denatured alcohol and powdered graphite. And one reason for doing this is to kind of preserve the detail in the pattern, but it's also, since wax is like an oily substance and the dung mold mixture is water-based, it can repel if you don't have that mixture on there. So that's why you put the mold wash in these wax patterns. The next step is to add, similar to ceramic shell, like the slurry layer. So that's again preserving the detail, and it's also the first mold layer.
Is this done?
This first layer is just a mixture of fire clay and powdered graphite, and that's just to secure the detail of the pattern. But then you use the next layer is the fine. So you have this like fine mixture of finely sifted grog, finely sifted dung, and the fire clay, which is a very fine material. And you mix it together into like a consistency where it's not super wet, but it's not dry to the point where if you're trying to mold it over something, it cracks. So you add the fine layer, I just call it the fine layer because it has all the fine sifted materials in it. And you make sure you put it on when it's, like every layer you want to make sure you put it on when it's damp. So the layers can kind of mold together and like uniform, so you like squish it on there. Because if it's too dry between each layer, when you're heating the mold up to melt the wax out and to kind of fire that clay, it can crack off and separate, and that's can't really mold then. So, and then the medium layer and the coarse layer. So you just, the difference between each layer is the, I guess the siftedness of each material. So the Dung and clay method is an ancient form of ceramic shell, but the real difference is like ceramic shell, you dip and then you let it dry, and this one you need to make sure that each layer is put on when the next layer is still moist. And here's just a picture of the coarse layer on the right and the fine layer on the left, so you can kind of get a sense of the different grits that you're dealing with in each mixture. The next step is once the molds are all dry, you have to melt the wax out so you have the hollow inside for the metal to go into. But you also, okay. Well, it says build the kiln out of fire bricks and place the molds inside the kiln. And the reason why you fire these molds is to get them hot for pouring, to fire the clay and like solidify the materials together, to burn out that dung so you have that air in those pockets, and then also to melt the wax out of the mold. So it's multi-purpose little slot kiln that you have going on there. And then you light charcoal, and I've been using hardwood lump charcoal, so it actually looks like pieces of wood, and it's not just the charcoal that you use in like a grill, and it's supposed to burn a lot hotter and for longer than the like charcoal grill charcoal. So you light the charcoal and you put it in the kiln, and then you cover the kiln and you fire it for 2 to 3 hours, and you have to keep adding the charcoal because obviously it diminishes over time. And that's just the process. It's like an extended flash out kiln, so it's like specifically for the dung molds. Because if you put it in the flash out kiln, it's too much of a shock for it because there's that clay in there. When the molds are ready, it says, when ready to pour, take molds out of the melt-out kiln. Sorry for the cut-off words. But when the molds are ready, which is when they're glowing red, you take them out with tongs, flip them over, and bury them in sand, similar to how you do with shell, and then you pour them while they're still red hot on the inside. Like so. And these are the pieces that came out of those dung mold castings that was like with all the pictures up and down. So on this right picture, you can kind of see the lines of my hand of the impression. I wish you could see my cursor, but just so like right here is like the lines of my palm, and then these are like the lines of the creases in my fingers. So it really picks up every detail that shell would because of that slurry coat that you originally put on and the mold wash layer. And these are bronze. Them in bronze, but it also you get this detail with iron as well. Some of the pros of this process is the affordability. Because we're using all natural materials, they're like easier to find than, you know, a gallon of like resin that might be difficult to get if you're out of school and broke. And then also like the non-toxicity of the materials is very important, especially for people like me who are very allergic to the resins or any type of other mixtures for like sand or ceramic shell. And then it also really promotes the reuse of the materials. So after the molds are fired, you can crush them up and sieve them, and that gives you new grog to use. So you can, it is an environmentally friendly process, which is the last thing on the list. So I just find it's really great to kind of conserve our thing. But some of the cons are that it is a very extensive process, so it does take a long time and you have to be invested in it. You can't like let it sit for 3 days if you don't have time for it, because then that mold layer will dry out and you won't be able to kind of pick it back up. So it is a much slower process, and there are some limitations on size. Like, you could potentially do any size, but the larger you get, the thicker the mold has to be, which means the longer drying time, and the more potential for it to like crack when it's drying. If you have like really recesses, like you gotta kind of figure out how to dry the whole mold like the same way, so you don't have cracks on the inside. So I'm also doing like an all-day sort of demonstration tomorrow. Tomorrow.
Saturday?
On Saturday, the 21st. And it's just going to be in that like work shed that's that building right near the pouring site. I don't know if you've been to Pedvale and walked around there. But all throughout the day I have these waxes that like some people from the digital pattern workshop made, and everyone can come and help mix each like layer and like apply the layers if you're interested in that. And then Sunday from 10:30 to noon, somewhere between that time, not necessarily the whole time, we'll be building the wax melt-out kiln for the pour that is happening from 1:30 to 6. And that's when we'll be pouring all of the demo molds, the Dung molds included. And then if you would like any more information on this process, you can go to my website. And this is the little like tab that you would go to, the process tab. And I also have cards if anyone would like a card that looks on it. So that's it.
We'll open it up to questions.
Yes.
Confused on the ratios for all the materials for the layers.
Okay, the ratios. I have like a PDF file on this website, and also like more information about the specific things, but it's generally like per volume, so it's one cup, whatever size of the fine Dung, 1 cup of the fine grog, and 1 cup of fire clay, and then you just add water until it's like a good consistency. It kind of varies depending on what type of fire clay you're using, like the amount of water. And so the medium would be the same thing, 1, 1, and 1. And the coarse is a little different. It's like 1 of the Dung, 1 of the fire clay, and then 2 of the grog. And the grog really helps like suck up that moisture as well, like in the mold to help dry it. And I usually like roll it in grog afterwards. Yeah.
What is the best sort of dung to use for this process?
The best dung to use is cow dung because of all the fibers.
Right.
But people have also tried using other dungs, and you can also use other organic material like hair or old coffee grounds. But I haven't done them personally, but I've heard that they don't necessarily stay together as well as the cow dung, and that's because of all the fiber that's in the dung.
Right, okay.
What about horse?
Yeah, you could probably use horse as well. You know, it has all that hay in it, right?
You have a point, really.
What size limitation do you usually observe?
I've generally done things like grapefruit size or smaller, but I have also tried to do larger things, and the only thing you have to like make sure it's thicker when you go larger. So I talked down at
The dung is thicker.
the layers are thicker. Each layer is a little bit thicker. I talked to someone down in the International Sculpture Symposium from Nigeria who did a very similar sort of method, but like he cast like huge vessels that were like the size of trash cans, but I think his mold is like a foot thick. So it's just, time and investment. Yes?
What is your sifting process, like going from raw material and reducing it down?
At the conference site, they had like a bag of grog that was kind of all 3 different, like, I don't know what it's called, like meshes, I guess. All 3 different meshes, and so to separate those, I just use like a kitchen sifter and then pantyhose to like get the fine stuff. But for the dung, I just also used the kitchen sifters. So the dung like needs to be dry when you're sifting it, otherwise it just goops through. So you like dry the dung out. But I was using my face shield at one point for the grog because I didn't have a kitchen sifter. So I just was like doing that. But you can use any sort of like screen, like for like a window screen, and you can like put them at 45-degree angles to get smaller mesh sizes. Or you can buy an $80 sieve from the store.
I'm not familiar with grog. What is it?
Grog is a type of like crushed fired clay. So what they do is they like have this fired clay, and then they crush it down into different sizes that are different like mesh sizes that they put through like the screens. So I don't know like the exact like mesh size, because I just kind of use materials and meshes that I kind of find everywhere. But it's a type of, it's fired clay that is like ground down into different sizes, and that helps with the structure of the mold. And that's how you can like pour really hot metals into it.
So basically it's fired clay and fired clay.
It's fired clay and fired clay that hasn't been fired yet. So, yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so let's say you don't have a graphite wash, because that would be hard to get to. But can you get almost equally, good detail with the very fine dung? Because, you know, if you're putting it through a pantyhose, it's very fine. So, have you tried it with no graphite and just the dung? Because I bet it would work just as well.
I've tried it with just the slurry layer and without the mold wash layer. So it's just like powdered graphite and the fired clay for the slurry layer. And I think you could get pretty good detail with just the fine layer, but the, like I don't think I would have been able to get like that handprint detail necessarily. Because the graphite and the powdered fired, like the fired clay powder really gets into those like fine crevices. Whereas the fine layer has that sort of little bit of pockets in it, so.
So the graphite is an essential material then?
I think so.
Where is it, do you know how much it is and easy to get?
I think, I don't know. But
It's cheap.
It's
cheap.
cheap.
Yeah.
You can get it at Granger, just go to Granger.
From Granger, cool.
Just get powdered graphite.
yeah, I think it's a pretty,
Even Pearl Paint in New York, you can buy it at a catalog. Dave Blake.
Just to throw it out there, in the UK, graphite powder is quite expensive.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Usually.
but you can certainly try it with the fine layer and just use like a finer mesh to get it even finer. I just use like a relatively fine mesh because I have that slurry layer, but you can definitely do experiments, you know, for the, if you just use like, the pantyhose, like, that would probably be a really great, texture detail. Yes?
When arguing for the relevance of such a traditional mold making method, conceptually, what do you feel like is the strength of using this technique versus using modern day mold making techniques?
I think there's more of a connection with the actual material, and because I'm such a tactile artist, I really feel it's important for me to use these methods that kind of take more consideration and more thought. And I really enjoy the making process, not necessarily just the finished object. So I think for me personally, it just has that deeper connection to that material and to like the base roots of that material.
Thank you.
Do you use sand of any kind ever?
Yeah, when I was doing, for my senior thesis exhibition, I was doing large molds, and so I had no way, there was no way I could like make all of my molds out of dung, because there's, like, the drying time is really, like, the thing that is an issue there. And so I would use resin sand, but I have to, like, I feel like I'm in a snowsuit the whole time.
No, I meant sand mixed with dung or anything else.
Oh, I've never tried any of that before, but that would be an interesting experiment. Yeah.
What's the time save the hand that you made? How long did that take to fabricate the 3 different layers? Because you said, because I'm used to doing ceramic shells, so I'm used to it being like, okay, it's like 4 days work or whatever.
Yeah, well, we can do it in a day. We're gonna be doing it in a day. It's just, like, if you have more water in each layer, then it's going to take a really long time to dry.
Yeah.
So, and then if it's like really moist outside, or if you leave your mold outside and it rains, and then you have to re-dry it. But, you could probably do it in a day. That's what we did for those molds. I just had all 12 of them and just did them all in one day. So, yeah.
On average, how long do you allow your molds to dry?
I think like a day or 2 days, depending on the climate, would be like, all right, we're gonna do it in a day, and hopefully that'll work really well. But you could, like, if they're in a dry place and you don't, like, because the really great thing about this method is I could go home and like do this mold and then have it dried with the wax still in it and bring it to a conference or something and do the like melt out part and get it poured. So you could have it, if it's in a dry place, like just have it sitting there forever until you want it.
It can't be too dry.
No, I don't think it can be true dry.
So Arizonians with 120 degrees, that's not gonna crack.
Yeah, no, because when you're firing the mold, it gets up to, I think, it gets up to 1200 to 1400 degrees Fahrenheit in that. So you're actually firing that clay to give it that hardened strength.
So in the burnout furnace?
Yeah, it gets really hot, but over like slow periods, so it's not like the flash out kiln where it just like shocks it. So,
I had a question.
yes.
When you've burnt out with the wax, do you have to pour it there and then, or can you put it by and then reheat it and then pour the bronze or the iron?
I think it's better to pour it right away, just so
Right.
like if there's any fine fine details in there, it might get like jostled
Yeah.
or something. Because I think once it like dries, it's if you have like a really thin layer between two things, then that might break like over time with moving it.
So you,
But
so
you
you
certainly-
could rest it and then put it by and then burn it out and then cast it at the same time. So you wouldn't have empty more sitting around. Because I think it might be tricky to actually do the burnout and have the
Oh,
bronze melt at the same time, timing
Yeah.
wise.
I'm sure you could do that.
Right.
I wanted to talk about the content of your work, and so the ideas, feelings, and poetry you put into it, and how that relates to the process, but more the ideas and like, process is great, but what's going on in your mind?
In this work, in this work or like.
Yeah.
Okay, well, in this work, I was really interested, it was just after I had this whole, oh my god, I can't do like sand anymore because I break out. And so I was really interested in finding this new material and this new way of making things. And as sort of like a thanks to this material, I decided to do these like kind of offerings. So like, oh, thank you, like this offering for the material and the process and discovering it. But most of my work is like now is about the process and kind of the meticulous nature of creation and using my hands. I just love working. I love working. So. Does that answer your question?